Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me once again, Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on? Sorry, I forgot that we're in the
Cameron,
same room. We don't have to have headphones on.
exactly. Yeah, I was gonna call it out, but you took it off before I could. Cameron and I are going to be talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny today. Back on our Spoilercast grind, as we've been, a lot over the last few months. We both saw the movie Friday night. So yeah, we're going to be chatting about that. As always, we will do kind of our spoiler-free impressions first, and then dive into full spoiler talk. Before that, if you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast everywhere you can, all that fun stuff. Once again, share it on Twitter, as long as Twitter continues to exist.
Yeah.
We'll see. So Cam,
Mhm.
spoiler free, what were your thoughts coming out of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
This is a very good movie. It's very good. It is a great kind of like, you know, I guess a great kind of climax to the kind of idea of the saga of Indiana Jones, as it were. It has, I think, a lot of great high notes. I think that there's very few low points in the movie. Um, it overall, it delighted me. It excited me. It made me question, how is this thing going to work? What's the mystery going on here? And everything just kind of does a fantastic job acting wise across the board. Is pretty fantastic. Um, it goes in places like you kind of don't expect. It goes to places that you are like, it leads you up there, but it's believable. And it gets you to that point where you are just kind of like slowly, they're increasing kind of the adventure vibe of this movie. And it gets to a point where when it all hits the climax, it's fantastic. So,
Yeah, I'm largely on the same boat. I also enjoyed it. I thought, for me, it ultimately is probably going to fall like in the middle of the
mm-hmm.
indies. I think this isn't that it doesn't reach the highs of Raiders or
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade, but it's infinitely better than Temple of Doom and better than our rewatch of Crystal Skull. And there was a moment in there where I found myself thinking, oh, like, yeah, the jump that they made with Crystal Skull into like sci-fi pulp didn't work. Indy is a pulp action archaeology character.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that this movie goes back to that so much, I think really worked in the character's favor. A lot of fun with some of the characters. I do have some nitpicks, and there are a couple weaker elements among the cast for me. We'll talk about later on. But yeah, it was a fun kind of not fully return to form, but it was a fun send off for the Indiana Jones character.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it I didn't go into this having like read a whole bunch about what the movie was going to be, and like
Nope.
I'd seen a couple of the trailers and stuff like that. So it did go to places where I was like, oh, okay, that's like interesting that it's exploring those themes and those
Mm-hmm.
ideas and those relationships. And yeah, it ended up pulling my heartstrings, which I was not expecting. Kind of walking away from this, I was expecting kind of a Indiana Jones action adventure kind of thing. I think this takes the most inspiration from Last Crusade,
Mm-hmm.
in particular in the like the father son dynamic of Last Crusade. We have kind of the roles reversed there now, like they tried to do with Crystal Skull, with Indy and Mutt, but here we have Indy and Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who I think is a lot of fun. I think is
Mm-hmm.
really good in this. They kind of have as the goddaughter, as they've highlighted in trailers and stuff. I think she brings a lot of fun to the role and gives the opportunity to bring different layers out of Harrison Ford as Indy, which is always, I think, what serves that character best
Mm-hmm.
is getting to see multiple sides of our favorite archaeologist, professor, not grave robber kind of character. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think anything else. I will say, like, it's no surprise, and we'll talk about it probably more in the spoiler filled section. The de aging stuff still doesn't quite work for me. It'd be interesting because I think like visually it's largely fine, but there is a disconnect because you hear old Harrison Ford's voice coming out of 30 years younger Indy or something like that, and it just doesn't work. It hits that uncanny valley level of like my brain can't process this because I know what, especially having spent the last month watching old Indiana Jones movies, I know what that character should sound like when he looks like that, and he doesn't sound like that. So that's what's breaking the illusion more than like maybe iffy CG. CG looked fine.
Yeah, I think CG wise it worked. It works really well. I think they've beat the visual uncanny valley, but like the audio and kind of like vibe and feel they haven't beaten yet. So
Yeah.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned it like I mentioned it last night on the way home. It's like it's way too weird hearing old Harrison Ford through young Harrison Ford's mouth.
Yeah. But yeah, it has some fun with the end of the 60s setting that this one kind of exists in. And yeah, it was a good fun time. And we'll chat more details in our spoiler filled section. But yeah, I think I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I went in not expecting a ton, but I walked out having had a very good time, and I don't think you're ever going to get better of a send off than Indy quite literally riding off into the sunset with his dad and Salah and Marcus Brody at the end of Last Crusade. But this is a better possible ending, I think, for the character than even the last one. Like the last one, the ending of the last one was like, oh, that's a nice beat to end on, but it wasn't a great last adventure for Indy.
I think that was the thing.
This I think is a better, more fitting, has a lot of fun thematic ideas behind it as a last hurrah for Indiana Jones.
I will get into it deeper into the spoiler section, but I have a few points to that I think like Indy as a character, like as a character in media and art, this is definitely a better send off than Crystal Skull, but may not actually match with like what might be a better send off if Indiana Jones was a real person, what you'd want for Indiana Jones as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get into that in the spoiler section.
Yeah. All that said, vagaries regarding the ending, but the ending going to be a divisive ending. I fully expect that.
I can see that.
Much like Crystal Skull was. If you go with it, you go with it. If you don't, you don't. I was fine going along with this one because every Indiana Jones has had weird, fantastical elements that don't make sense. So this one, why not do some more of that with this one? So yeah. Any final spoiler-free thoughts before we dive into spoilers, Cam?
No. Other than just go see this movie. I think this is a movie that's definitely worth going to see it in theaters. We saw it at the Cine Capri, which is a very large theater screen, and I know I had a blast doing it. I was just enthralled with just the spectacle of seeing this on such a big screen, and just having a great time with it. So
yeah,
that's my recommendation. If you want to see it, don't wait for it to come on Disney Plus. Go see it in the theaters.
There you go.
It's worth it.
All right. Then diving into full spoiler territory. Cam, where do you want to start, I guess, spoiler-wise?
So I think we should start off kind of like where things left off in Crystal Skull, which was Indiana Jones. Like we mentioned, and this is kind of tying back to what I said, when it comes to his adventure, Archimedes' Dial and the journey he goes on with Helena, and kind of like this idea of like getting Helena back on the right track while also passing on the archaeology torch, and kind of the adventuring torch to Helena feels like a more full circle for Indy's story as an adventurer. Whereas Crystal Skull was finding fulfillment for Indy in his personal life in regards to reuniting with the love of his life and finding out that he has a son and things like that. They decide to put Indy through the ringer this one at the beginning, where we find out that like Mutt has been killed in what I presume is Vietnam. Because of the time frame, right?
I think we say it's probably Korea.
Well, Korea was 50s. If we're talking, if moon landing's 1969,
yeah.
So if we're 1969, we're talking the very beginnings of the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And so 1968 to 1969 is when you start seeing the like large casualties start piling up in Vietnam.
I mean, I'll take your word for it. This is saying like, oh, it started in like the in the 50s, but yeah.
So the actual like conflict of Vietnam is a lot longer, but
Yeah.
late like throughout the 60s the anti-war movement, but it definitely can't like we get to in the late 60s you start seeing the casualty rate rise so high that in 1971 to 1972 the war in Vietnam ends with America taking the L under the withdrawal under Richard Nixon of all people.
Yeah.
So
I always just remember the poor public school history system basically always ended at like World War II. That was as far as we got. So Korea, Vietnam, and later is always like a bit of a blur.
It's because that's when you get into like the like modernist politics also at the same time.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a point of contention for historians how they want it to be remembered.
But anyway, yes, Mutt has recently passed as an enlisted soldier, and we get kind of a hint of that early on in the film, and then we get like Indy's real reaction to it much later in the film, and that like the heartbreak that like. For the first thing we see is like the divorce papers, separation papers from Marion.
Yeah.
And we see like we get introduced to after the kind of de-aging flashback sequence, we get introduced to like modern Indy in his like just boxers, grumpy old man next to a whole bunch of hippies. Celebrating the moon landing and yeah, like like I went into this, I was like, I hadn't seen Marion in any of this stuff, so I figured she just wasn't even going to be in the movie. So I was like, how are they going to write her off?
I saw her at the image of her at the premiere, but there was a lot of people at the premiere from older movies.
Exactly.
So I'm not
like
surprised.
Ke Huy Quan at the premiere. I knew he wasn't in this movie.
Yeah, we knew he wasn't.
I had heard him say, "Sorry, they didn't put me in the movie. Don't expect me to be in the movie," kind of thing. So yeah, I figured if I'd seen anybody at the premiere, it was largely like, oh, they're there because they're tied to the franchise.
That's the only thing I knew about Marion then.
So I will say like the appearance of Marion at the end, a fun little reveal. But yeah, the introduction that they've separated, and then later finding out. Getting the hint later of like Mutt died, and then really the scene on the boat where where Indy basically says like, if I could go back in time, I'd tell my son not to enlist because he's gonna die and it's gonna break his mother's heart, and that pain is gonna be too strong and it's going to tear us apart. And I was like, oh, that's like. That is like the emotional heart of the movie, where I was not expecting like that kind of like beat from Indy.
That beat like that, like I teared up. I was like on the verge of crying during that monologue. That monologue is so brutal. Helena's character often makes light of like serious things in kind of like a devil may care fashion, and even then that was like a big like moment for her character.
Oh, I stepped in it.
Yeah, like this is really awful. And it feels visceral and awful. And it's when he talks about like what it did to Marion and how he's like, I just can't, I don't have what it takes to help her heal. And so we break up, and it's like, and here's the thing, that happens all the time when people lose a kid.
Yeah.
When people lose a kid, I think it's more often than not, couples do not stay together if there's a loss of a child. It is so brutal to see that happen, and to see couples who come out the other end stronger together is incredible. And when it doesn't happen, it's just heartbreaking, because it is a fissure in the family in a way that just cannot be compared to pretty much anything else. Like you can lose a parent, like the idea of like a parent should never have to bury their child is very much on Harrison Ford's like this is who Indiana Jones is now. Yeah. Is an old man who is teaching a bunch of kids who don't care. Gone are the days where he is this celebrity archaeological professor with girls writing I love you on their eyelids, like gone is that, and these kids could care less because the moon landing's happening.
Yeah.
The future is now, old man. Feel that you get from the beginning of that movie. And kind of like the days gone by, like the idea of like what it means, and he's getting retired.
Mm-hmm.
They give him a clock that gives a homeless guy, which is
Yep.
just so good. But you see when Helena starts interacting with him, how excited he gets about archaeology.
Yeah.
And
Like when
yeah.
he gets that feedback from what he doesn't realize is like what he thinks is a student in that moment. He doesn't realize it's her. He doesn't recognize her, and B, doesn't realize that it's not a student from his class. He gets super, super excited to like engage, which is there's an interesting indictment on like education and whatnot in there as well, I'm sure. But yeah, I will say like it is, and we got this. I guess we didn't get it with Crystal Skull as much, but like there does seem to be, and I've heard other people kind of talk about this trend in these like legacy sequels of like taking your characters, obviously like we saw it, probably most distinctly with Luke Skywalker, of like taking your heroes and trauma and hardship has happened to them. I mean, like the arc of this story ultimately is like wildly close to Han Solo's story, which I didn't think about in the moment, but I saw one of the other critics I saw kind of like reviewing kind of talk about that, and like I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is. Obviously Harrison Ford being the linking factor between both of those, but yeah, like loss of a child puts you down on the outs, and trying to come back from that, separated from your wife, all that, like it is Force Awakens Han Solo kind of beat. But yeah, I think Helena immediately comes in, like breathes new life into him, obviously also because immediately throws him into like a CIA kind of like faux CIA thing going on.
So this is what I love, is this is engaging with a lot of really cool, not cool, and like it's cool that they're engaging with it, is one, Project Paperclip, which is when we converted Nazis over to giving them fake identities, putting them in like rural universities and stuff like that.
Voller being at the University of Alabama is like a direct call out to Werner von Braun.
Exactly, yeah. And also getting people to the moon, 100%. That correlation
rockets,
there.
all that stuff, yeah.
Werner von Braun, who like to his dying day was still a fucking Nazi, so yeah, it is a scathing indictment of Project Paperclip with the inclusion of this. You bring in the rise of PMCs with these mercenaries who work for it's Werner, right?
Voller.
Dr. Voller. Who work for him, and it's very much like that sly. I don't do work for a country. This kind of like very much disenfranchised military man that you get from these mercenaries, and you get a like kind of like a look at that. You get a look at like the CIA completely covering for like I love that. I love that immediately it pulls it into, and once again the CIA and the FBI making a mess of Indiana Jones's life in these last two movies. Yeah, it's great. I love that. I love it when that starts popping off, and you realize. Also, shout out to when what's his name's character is getting introduced at the very beginning. He's learning German.
Oh yeah, the henchman, the mustachioed henchman.
Yeah, mustachioed henchman. He's learning German because they're going. The plan is to go back in time,
yep.
and so it makes total sense, and I love that. Strongman, great. Like they stack the villain deck fantastically. I wasn't sure how the CIA agent was going to interact, and then they murder her, and it's great.
Phrasing, but okay.
Oh yeah, sorry. Like yeah, no. I mean, narratively, it's wonderful because it's like, well, how do they deal with like what's the response of how do you make up for America not really being on board with this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, is it like we just write it off? It's like, nope. These bad guys murder all the CIA people in the helicopter. They just murder them all, and I'm like, great. Don't have to worry about like that. It's just like That's the whole thing with that. Also, shout out to him at the very beginning when he said, "We didn't lose the war; Hitler lost it."
Yeah,
and
you didn't win the war. Hitler lost it.
Yeah, the whole culmination of everything being set up at the beginning, being paid off at the end,
but
works.
like while also like obviously, yeah, him being just a super Nazi who never stopped being a Nazi, and still like being super like racist against not only the CIA operative that has been assigned to, you know,
the waiter
or whatever, but yeah, the waiter there, and you know, the parallel of like, oh, are you enjoying your victory kind of thing. Obviously, you know, that soldier came back from war and still lived in a very racist America, so didn't have like the best of time coming back. Well, sure.
That's also one of my things that I found interesting, is because a lot of post-World War, like pre-World War II, leading up into post-World War II, of the experience of Black Americans is that there was there's a lot that goes into the kind of like racial politics about World War II that touches on in a very light way, while letting us know that yes, America is still really racist, even though these guys went over and fought and were quote unquote heroes for fighting for their country. But it's the idea they fought for a country who then, when they came back, immediately asked them to use the back door. It's rough. But also at the same time, like it's the way he does it so gleefully is just like, oh, you're still a shitbag Nazi.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to his monologue where he says, "We've conquered space. Now it's time for the next frontier." And I'm like, oh, time.
Mm-hmm.
In my head, I'm like, oh, that's so good.
Yeah. Going back to the introduction we get of him, diving into the like de-aged, the past, and like, you know, this being our first real time seeing World War II era.
Yep.
Like in the midst of it, Indy. Out there,
which was alluded to and talked a lot about in Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Out there, run around with Toby Jones, trying to save all these antiquities from this, you know, Nazi castle, where he gets introduced to Dr. Voller, who's out there. Both of them like trying to find the spear that killed Christ. That is a red herring. It was a fake. So, but then, yeah, the Archimedes dial, like the half of it being the only thing that like Voller recognizes is the only thing of note here. Mm-hmm. We're late in the war. Hitler's already in hiding. Like Indy kind of gets to have the like those taunts and those jabs. War's nearing an end. And Voller, like, even from those moments, we see Voller's disdain for Hitler, and like he's focused on the wrong things.
Shout out to when the officer, when talking to Voller, was just like, "Have you ever even talked to Hitler, like to know about like how bad it's going to go?" And they have to tell him the lance is fake. Mm-hmm. And then we get the clue later that Voller had a very bad interaction with Hitler back in 1939 when Hitler came to inspect a rocket that Voller was in charge of. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Like such fantastic callbacks even back then. Also, I love that Voller wasn't like the nemesis of Indiana Jones coming back. It's much more of he was just a goon, like a scientist goon on the side.
Yeah.
It has very little to do with what's actually going on with Indy's story at that moment. Mm-hmm. And it's just fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. It like he runs into Indiana Jones by happenstance. Yep. And like it, like he's definitely leaves an impression, because obviously like Indy almost dies to him until the guy gets knocked out by a freaking like railway signpost kind of thing, which also kind of begs the question, like, how did he survive that?
Oh, so that's I forgot what it's called, but it's a contraption where it actually rotates when something hits it.
Yeah,
it's meant to be for like dropping off like parcels and packages and stuff.
I'm aware.
Oh, okay.
Hitting it at that speed, a person is still going to die.
Potentially.
But yeah, it's, you know, it's Indiana Jones, so people live unnatural lives anyway.
Yeah, I mean, not Hitler. Indiana Jones lived in a refrigerator, lined refrigerator.
Yeah.
When the impact alone should have killed him.
Indeed. So. Yeah. but yeah, Mads Mikkelsen I think is a lot of fun in this role. And then yeah, the like he's just kind of like a constant like menace and a thorn in the side and stuff like that. Obviously, he comes and like wrecks havoc on their boat. Smart enough to be able to deduce and figure out where they're going just based off of seeing that they're going west instead of east. And yeah, the fact that his like ultimate plot is not to go back and help Hitler win the war. It's to go back and kill Hitler so he can take over and win the war. Is like, oh shit, that was a fun little swerve.
What kind of Nazi wants to kill the Fuhrer?
Yeah,
such a great
one who wants victory.
Yeah,
kind of being like again, yeah, a callback to like, you didn't win, Hitler lost. I'm not going to lose. I've had 15 years to think about every mistake that he made. We're going to do it better. 25 years, I guess, at that point.
Yep. I love that. I also love the idea that like it speaks so much to his hubris.
Yeah.
And that ends up being like once again, the hubris of the Nazis is their downfall.
Mm-hmm.
Like any good Indiana Jones Nazi experience, the Nazis seem to have the upper hand until them just being dumbasses bites them in the ass.
I mean, it's not necessarily them being dumbasses so much as, oh, the thing they found does have supernatural powers that they were not expecting.
Well, this time he does expect it, but
he's expecting it, but
expect.
Yeah. Well, he's expecting it, but he doesn't. It sends him back to a different time than he was expecting. Which yeah, like that's ultimately it was okay. Like obviously enough of this movie is about the theme of time. So this like setting up this idea of like, okay, this thing is going to be magical, like all of the other, adventures we've followed. It's going to actually send them back in time. What's that going to be like? How are we going to get out? And then there was so much attention played to it being like, okay, we're going to go back to 1939, that like when they, are flying over and there's triremes and it's the fall of, or the fall of Syracuse. It was like, oh, okay. They went way back. We see like Archimedes building the Archimedes dial.
Yep.
Is a fun little bit. There was.
Oh, shout out to the tomb though, where they're like, he went to the future.
Yeah.
It's
it was an interesting kind of red herring there as well of like, okay, yeah, like why does this dragon have propellers? Which obviously we know.
Phoenix. The Phoenix
sorry. Why does this Phoenix have propellers? Which we understand because of the plane later on. And then yeah, also how did he have a watch? Oh, he didn't travel forward in time. They had traveled back, and he just got their stuff.
And he kept the watch. They took the completed dial because, as Helena says, he still has to finish the dial.
Yeah.
Like
we can't break time and do that. He has to make his own. Yeah, and so I think that's mostly where people are going to like, you're in or you're out.
Oh yeah.
It is very much like an opposite of the Flash, the beginning of the movie, you're in or you're out. Here it is like, okay, now we're doing time travel. I can already imagine Logan not liking this.
Well, he's not on this podcast.
I know it would have been a very interesting podcast had he seen the movie this weekend and joined us for it, because he has already like come out and said, I don't want them to travel. I don't want them to do time travel. And so it's like, all right, I like when they do time travel, I was like, Logan's not going to be happy. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was a nice moment for Indiana Jones, who has dedicated his life to history and archaeology, to get to see that history firsthand, as like part of his final adventure in a way that, yeah, Crystal Skull wasn't that satisfying beat, because it didn't have anything to do with like living history. Here he is living history. He wants doesn't think he's got anything to go back for, but like Helena kind of like socks it to him to bring him back and kind of convince him otherwise.
In a very Indiana Jones ass move,
yeah.
She knocks his ass out.
Yeah. And so yeah, I was okay with it. I like the idea that like, you would expect a World War II era, plane, to be able to more than hold its own against against a handful of 200 BC era wooden ships, but nope. The Romans get the better of the Nazis and take them out. So we get the end to Voller's story there. Led, I think, less by his hubris so much as like the inability to adapt in that moment, I guess.
That's a good point. Yeah, well, when he realizes that he forgot to include a factor that Archimedes could never have known.
It's I don't like that's we get the continental drift thing. It's I don't know how that's supposed to tie into, because like obviously they still went to the place. They still went, like the vibe we get is that Archimedes was always trying to bring people back to his time for help. Like he basically saw the end was nigh with the Romans coming, and so it's like a beacon for help, calling people from the future to try and aid him, I guess.
So the idea that I picked up from it was there are different time fissures that lead you to different points, and so you have to basically coordinate it to what time you think you want to go to. That's why they had the different like coordinates that you have to enter into it. At one point, I forgot who hands off the list, but it says enter these coordinates in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
That's the it's Indy.
Yeah,
he gives it to Helena. To enter those coordinates in reverse. The idea is basically that I picked up from it was you determine which coordinates you want to go to based off what time you want to go to, and it has to do with like those times that you put in. With the continental drift, because it's a system, it's an item of mathematics and physics that it is only finding these things. It's not creating them. And so you end up like it's basically supposed to be like a time compass, but your different time fissures is what you have to be led to. So they went into the wrong time fissure from that.
Yeah, I don't buy that, because I think the chances that they went into the wrong time fissure that just happens to be the time fissure that takes them to Archimedes is too astronomical. So yeah, it strikes me as like the idea that they were going to go back to the 1939 was probably the error and the fallacy kind of thing.
I disagree, but okay.
Yeah, I mean they don't give us a hard answer one way or the other, so
I felt anyway. There's absolutely no reason we need to be arguing about this semantic point in a movie.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, much like all of these movies, like it has that kind of thing of like, I don't quite know how the science is supposed to make sense, but whatever. It's still like the arcs of the characters, I think, work better here than they did in the last one. Be it Helena kind of going from con artist to and being in it all for the money, to coming back and being like, no, I gotta save Indy. We gotta bring him back home. I think is a great arc for her, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a lot of fun in that role. And then Indy kind of getting this one last adventure and being able to help her in that journey, and kind of be the godfather that he wasn't, that she needed in a helping hand earlier. I like the if only there was like a dedicated person that should have been that paternal figure for me. Almost an ordained role of some sort. Was a fun beat.
Yeah.
One of the things that didn't work for me as much was Teddy. I didn't like he obviously they're going for like short round vibes with him. Didn't really work. Like he strikes me mostly as like, well, we're gonna end the movie with plane stuff, so we're gonna introduce this kid who's like learning how to fly a plane through toys and props and stuff at the beginning, and that's gonna come into play at the end. It's like, all right, he just never really clicked for me. He was too far on the side of like annoying kid sidekick in particular. And I know, like, I think you talked about like you were enjoying him coming out of it, but like the him, stealing, like pickpocketing, like the bully Italian kid or whatever, and then going and getting gelato, and then just like seeing and like running into the Voller and his henchmen and stuff like that. It's like, all right, he's like he is existing only to like get kidnapped in that moment and to like fly the second plane so they've got a way home. And it just didn't work for me.
It worked totally fine for me. I didn't have a problem with it.
We got Antonio Banderas. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah.
We get that fun little. I guess I liked the stuff on the boat. I didn't like the stuff in the ocean, like in the water at the seafloor kind of thing.
Okay.
Apart from it being like a fun little gag of eels.
Oh yeah.
You know, being the snakes of the water.
I like that. I felt that it was too the how do you do with the bends? You do the bounce. The 3 minutes, only 3 minutes. That I had an issue with because I feel like the Nazis showing up and cutting the airlines is far more reasonable of a reason why we need to hurry and get out of the water than anything else. So
yeah, I like, if anything, that struck me more as like, if we don't say something about this, people are gonna be like, how did Indy not die of the bends by going down that deep and stuff like that. But yeah, the Nazi, again, like the Nazis just happening to show up at just the right spot and know all that stuff. There's definitely contrivances in.
I don't see that as.
I guess they had Toby Jones's journal,
yeah.
So they knew where the original stuff had happened. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The whole point was that that Helena and Indy made it there first was the idea, but they were all heading to the same place.
I think part of the underwater stuff, the reason the underwater stuff didn't work for me is I'm still lightly traumatized from, I don't remember which of the Bond movies it was, but when Logan and I did that Bond show last year and like watched through all the Bond movies, there was one very clear one where they were like, look at this underwater technology we've gotten, and they just spend like a third of the movie in underwater shots, which are wildly boring and slow, and you can't have dialogue, so you're just kind of relying on dark action, and the action here was, okay, they're going into a boat and we the audience are trying to make sure they're not crossing their lines or whatever, you know, they're trying to do, and so I was just like, I didn't need that. I think you could have cut that like, or highly abbreviated that sequence, and I would have been happier to have had those 10 minutes back of my life. But yeah, I think those were the two like main things that I was just like, this didn't really work for me. But yeah, I liked a lot of the other stuff. We talked leaving the movies. We talked both of us were fans of the like New York chase through the parade and kind of all that stuff, and Indy in the subway. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Oh, I love the chase. The chasing that I will be honest, the first probably half of this movie, I am enthralled the entire time. I am less interested and enthralled in probably the back half of this movie, but everything up to, I think, Greece is fun, fascinating. It's high paced. I love the chase scenes in this movie. Whether it's the New York urban cowboy chase scene, as well as the Moroccan chase scene, or sorry, the
Tangier's tuk-tuk.
Yeah, that whole entire chase scene is fantastic. It's wonderful on so many different levels, and it's just a lot of fun. Both of them are unique in their own ways, not just with like, oh, Indy's on a horse and everybody else is on like motorcycles. It's the contrast of, we have already shown Indy to be the old man who's now like at the end of his time, and the future is now old man type thing. We have astronauts visiting. We have all this stuff about Moon Day, and Indy gets on a horse to ride to chase off, and he's being chased by a car and a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of dynamic and aspect of hotshot kind of a Nazi on a motorcycle chasing him through the subway when he's on a horse, and the old man winning in the end, the old cowboy winning. And then you get to Morocco, where you have like those fun moments where Helena, like they're trying to tell Indy, no, you got to like turn left or turn right, and he turns left instead. And they're just like, what's wrong with you? And he goes, I know what I'm doing. And he's like,
I know Tangier.
I know Tangier. It's so good to see the fun aspects of both chase scenes. I also love that the Tangier chase scene has a mobster who's in love with Helena, who's like trying to like gun her down, but at the same time convince her to come back and like be his wife, and it's done in such a wonderful way. I love it. It's so fantastic.
Yeah. Fun little bit of campy stuff there. And yeah, we talked about this earlier. You alluded to this earlier. I like the moment where Helena does get like caught up in the excitement of, we just got away from Voller, like we stole their boat, like we have the clue. I didn't woo, that was so fun. And Indy's like, my friend was just murdered because we just saw them kill Antonio Banderas' character.
And also the kid was like had really bonded with that crew as well. So like the kid also was just like, yeah, it's like basically everybody but Helena. Like Helena was super stoked. Everyone else was just like, we just had people got murdered in front of us.
Yeah.
And Helena's like, yeah, because she's still kind of a bad person at this point.
Yeah, I mean, she like, well, she's bad. Yeah, she's a con woman still who just got to be completely in her element.
Yeah.
Like, I know how to translate this thing. I can solve these clues. I can do it all while swiping a bit of dynamite to plan our escape. She was absolutely like on fire in that moment on the boat.
Yeah. She's
just so
high.
caught up in her thing that she is like disconnected from the human cost of what just happened.
Absolutely. It is just 100%. She's riding high off of everything.
Yeah.
And just absolutely just like forgets, oh yeah, somebody was just murdered in front of us who like literally helped us out of the goodness of like their heart. They're just an old friend of Indy's.
Speaking of old friends of Indy's, we got Salah, who had made his way to New York with the help of Indy. Like that little bit of kind of tying him into the world and his exploits and kind of moving and the like little bit of like culture of like his kids know their history, they know American history, they know their Egyptian history. I was like, oh, good, another good immigrant story there, kind of thing with Salah, and the like that yearning to go back on adventure. I thought was a nice, sweet moment, and Indy, who has lost a son, who isn't looking for adventure anymore, kind of like waving him off and being like, I'm doing this because I need to clear my name.
Yeah,
I'm wanted for murder. This is not an adventure, Salah.
Yeah. Well, what I love is like, it's not just the adventure when he's just mentioned, and you hear him talking, he's talking about his homeland. He's talking about a place he loves. And you hear that in the way that like the entire, like the way that entire monologue goes off is just so beautiful. And so just like, I yearn for home. And then is like, let's go on another adventure. And Indy, like you said, Indy's just like, I'm not going on an adventure. I need to clear my name. I'm wanted for murder. They murdered two of my colleagues. Two people who were like, is Indy happy or stoked about retiring? Absolutely not. But these are two people
who want people, like completely innocent people, to die for no reason.
Well, they also threw him at, like, you could tell when he's at the party, it's like he's people are genuinely like people genuinely care about him that work with him. And it's very clear, like he might be an unsociable, grumpy old man, but he's still, when he's at the party, he's jovial. Like, is he putting on like a thing? Probably. But at the same time, he has people who care about him, and like they were happy that he is, they're happy he is completing his career, and then they're murdered.
Yeah.
It's brutal too. Like the whole, like that the CIA gal is just like, stop shooting innocent people.
Yeah.
Like to the guy who's,
I mean, yeah, she got in bed with the wrong people.
Yep. Well, this United States government got in bed with the wrong people.
Yeah. I mean, she could have walked away from the job, though, is my thinking there.
For sure. Absolutely. She was CIA. She's not innocent.
There was a moment like when she gets introduced and like we see her basically in the background of a shot, and like the camera lingers on her enough for us to know she's tracking Indy. She's kind of following. I appreciated that, like that is kind of tying into like, yeah, black people were still very easily going to be like overlooked during that era, so they could have just kind of been hiding in plain sight.
Pretty much, yeah.
as an interesting little tidbit there.
Also, massive celebrations going on. Easy to hide in it.
True. So yeah, all the adventure happens, and then we get Indy coming to kind of in the modern, like back in the modern day. Didn't get his wish to stay in the past and just die there. And then we get the nice little scene of that Helena brought Marion back to help take care of him, and we get a beautiful callback that had me in tears.
Oh yeah, absolutely in
To
tears at this point.
To the like, well, where doesn't it hurt? Obviously, them like referencing that iconic moment from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but here, it being a more emotional hurt than anything else of the loss of their son, and the time, like obviously we get the vibe that they did have some time with him, so that's
Oh yeah,
nice
yeah.
and good, because I guess this would be what 12 years since the last movie. So yeah, the like they had some time, probably a decade to love and care for Mutt,
And be a family.
and be a family together, and then that all ripped from them. And so yeah, the way that in which they utilized that kind of story beat in conjunction with the Raiders callback was very, very beautiful. And I was like, yay, I like this. This is another thing of like, I'm happy Indy got to see history up close and personal, and I'm happy that he's going to get his, to close out his days with Marion. In my head canon, that's what's going to happen. There's not going to be another filing of separation papers. They're not going to continue their will they won't they that they've been doing for 5 movies. Like they're going to end their days together, and that's the way I want Indy to go out. I want him to have a happy ending, as happy as he can have. Helena and Sala are out there taking out the kids for ice cream, and there you go. Any other thoughts or anything you want to chat about, touch on?
I think I'm with you. I think this is the third best Indiana Jones movie.
Mm-hmm. We'll inevitably do a that D plus show on it, so yep. we'll talk about it more then too, I'm sure.
But yeah, I think that this is it's a really great movie. I think it's super done super well, and I'm just a fan of it. I just think that this is such a great kind of capstone to Indiana Jones and potentially Harrison Ford's entire career. So
yeah, it was a nice way for the character to go out. A little love letter, lots of little Easter eggs and references to the old adventures in there, obviously.
Oh, shout out to when he's like on the wall. He's like, I've had to drink the blood of Kali, had voodoo used against me.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, good fun times. And yeah, it's been, I cynically said as we were driving home, like, in 10 years we'll have a new Indiana Jones and they'll reboot the franchise and stuff like that. But it'll always be Harrison's thing. So, and I'm glad to see that he was glad with how this one turned out, based on what I've seen. So yeah, shout out to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And again, I liked that, like, thematically, this movie exploring time worked way better than any loose themes of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because it's something that you inevitably cannot escape when you're talking about Harrison Ford being 80 years old playing this character again. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you, Cam, for joining me to chat Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. As I said, I'm sure we'll do a That D Plus show when it comes to Disney Plus in a few months' time. So let's go around our table with any plugs. You can follow Cameron at RevCabot, 2 B's and 2 T's. What do you want to give a shout out to there, Cam?
Yeah, I want to give a massive shout out to That D Plus show. We did just finish Indiana Jones. If you're interested in all and seeing what we had to say about those films, or we rank them, we have, of course, our usual good bits whenever we're doing something like this, like Most Punchable Nazi and the kill count that we Trevor and I both mentioned on the way home last night. We were kind of mentally calculating our kill count in our head of how many who killed who and how many.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a great time. Go check out those episodes. It's been a lot of fun getting to do those with Trevor and Logan. So.
There you go. You follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will shout out our Let's Plays Tuesdays and Thursdays for still a couple more weeks. You can get my Let's Plays of Tears of the Kingdom. Last week we were down in the depths facing off against the Yiga clan. In the upcoming week's episodes, we'll be going off into the sky and the potential fifth temple in Sage. So stay tuned for that. And then also Cameron is winding down, I think only a couple episodes left of Jedi Fallen Order. So that'll be out on Wednesday as well. So yeah, stay tuned for all of that. youtube.com/thatnerdysite. Once again, if you liked what you heard, please remember to rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, ring notification bells, do all that fun stuff. Thank you for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.